Do we really believe that women are physically unable? Women can only occupy predetermined roles. Nobody ever gave women permission to play, they just actually gave it to themselves. When the men's game was professionalising, they didn't need a champion team, they need a champion. You hear the stat all the time about the All Blacks being the most winningest team of all time. Get out of here. That was the Black Ferns. They went unbeaten at the World Cup for like 4 World Cups. And we're talking every match, like pool play, for goodness sake. Our crowds in New Zealand need permission to make noise. Making room for other people, it's only going to make you stronger. The way to fairness, the way to championships, the way to everything that you want in terms of that sporting experience has to be through inclusion.
My name is Kyla Colbin. You're listening to my interview with Alice Soper, and this is the Hunger and Heart Podcast. Enjoy the show. Hello, my name is Kyla Colbin, and welcome to episode 36 of Hunger and Heart, a podcast on the intersection of wild ambition and fierce compassion. My guest today is Alice Soper. Alice has been playing rugby in Wellington women's teams since she was 13 years old. She's played 7s and 15s, and she's also played in England. She's a freelance journalist, a content creator, and a staunch advocate for getting women across the advantage line. In this conversation, we talk about the fact that the All Blacks are not the winningest team of all time. We talk about the difference between a team-first and a personality-first strategy, and the specific tactics the Tokomanawa Queens basketball team used to create a sense of fun and belonging. So, here you are, my conversation with Alice Soper.
Can we just start with you giving me like some of your context and backstory? What's the Alice Soper creation myth?
Sure. I mean, I always like to start grounding ourselves with where we're from, right? So for me, he urioi no Ngāti ko te rangi Ngāti Airihi komo hoki. So my settler whānau is from Ireland, or Scotland, Ireland and Cornwall. E tipu aku oku mātua e Gore. My parents grew up in Gore, so south of the South Island. Engari ko au he puti puti e puawai e roto e te whanganui a tara. But this beautiful blossom bloomed in Wellington. Ko Alice Soper tuku ingoa tinga tauko tēnā rā tātou katoa. Hello everyone, my name is Alice. In the 1800s, we came across, the Soper name anyway, came across from the gold mines in New South Wales and via Cornwall, which is where they were originally from, but came via the gold mine and ended up in the south of the South Island running a pub, because they were smart enough to know that if you couldn't find gold, you could sure as eggs serve some pints to people that might be looking for it, drown their sorrows or reward their victories.
I love that. I read this story once about this guy who made his fortune investing in small consumable items that people came to believe they couldn't live without. And when I first read that description, my first thought was like alcohol or cigarettes, but his first thing was toilet paper.
Ah, yeah, well, it was right during COVID, wasn't it? Because that was the thing everyone was going for straight away.
There you go, intelligence.
Yeah, so that
anyway,
was...
go on. So
so that's the Soper whānau. So they ended up running a pub. It was called Live and Let Live was the name of the pub as well. So that gives you a bit of an ethos, I guess, that was attached there. And then they bought land. I don't know, unfortunately, the story of how that land came to be available for purchase. I can't imagine it was in a very... Somebody probably lost out, let's just put it that way, for what we were able to get access to. So we ended up farming and parts of my whānau still do down in Southland. So actually I met Keith Quinn once and he told me that on the Soper side anyway, that there's one of my ancestors who has on a grave site down there the 3 Fs, football, family and farming. So that was very much our family down there. My great Uncle Ack has a trophy named after him because he played for the All Blacks back in the, a long time ago, 50s maybe. He was number 8, good player, and I met him once at a funeral, and he told me about how he used to put pieces of metal into his headgear to keep his ears nice for the ladies. But the other fun fact, again, about that Soper name is that the first team in Southland, I'm told, was entirely made of Sopers. So we used to have annual fixtures up until the 70s of our Soper family team would play, I think it was the Boyles or the Burnses, another local family. And so that's the Soper side. There's Cornish, but then there's a lot of Scots. There's Mackays, Fergusons, Andersons. Basically, all of my mother's side is Scottish, and that's very interesting and mix of people. Apparently, I can never get it right whether it was whether it was the cook or the heir, but basically there was a heir to a whiskey fortune got a cook pregnant and they were sent here to New Zealand, and that's another one of my family lines. So there's all types of interesting ones. And then the most recent, I think, to our shores is the Anderson whānau, and that was my mum's grandma. She ended up here on a boat that she'd come for as a nanny for a family, and they split ways when she got to New Zealand. And so that's the most recent. But we're pretty foundational in terms of the Pākehā story. When I'm in certain spaces, I talk about that as being a colonizer story, because the reality is we were the ones on the front line doing that, taking benefit from the land that had been made available. And when you look at our family lines and the privilege that we were built upon, a lot of it was that land that we had access to in those early parts of that story. So an interesting thing to unpack and learn along the way. But you've got to know where you come from. But that's my way back wins. The more recent one is
more recent.
Yeah, the more recent one is I'm one of a growing number of children. My dad keeps having them. I'm the youngest of the first batch. So my mum and dad had me and my 2 older sisters. So I was the full stop on that union. And then they split up and they started having boys. And so my mum has 1 son, and my dad has 2 out of that second marriage. And now he's got a couple more kids. So there's just lots of children, which again is probably indicative of why I am the way I am. One of my little brothers used to have to put his hand up at the dinner table if he wanted a chance to talk. So you got to get it in. Don't take
quick around here. Arms around the food kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
So
100%.
And you've got the 3 Fs, and obviously you're all black whakapapa. Like, tell me about your relationship with football.
Yeah,
rugby football specifically we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, I mean, although to be fair, my relationship with organised sport was with football, soccer first, because when I was a little girl, there wasn't any idea that girls would be playing at that time. And it's been really interesting. Like a hyperfixation of mine has been to try and learn more about the history of women's and girls rugby in Aotearoa. But yeah, my interaction with it didn't happen until probably, intermediate age. So my primary school went up to intermediate. I'd always loved the game, and, being a Kiwi kid, had fallen to sleep listening to rugby games, and we didn't necessarily go to them that often because I had a single mum for part of my childhood, so that was actually just priced out, and not to mention she was like fighting with the crowds to take a bunch of kids, no thanks. So we didn't necessarily, we watched them on the TV rather than in person. But the playing it for me wasn't until I was at intermediate. We had a teacher, Mr. Webb, who my primary school was all concrete, so we would play touch. I'm putting that in heavy quotations because we were playing pretty scraggy rugby, but when the teachers were watching, it was touch. But when Mr. Webb came along, he'd take us at lunchtime down to a field so we could actually, have at each other. That was lots of fun. And then when I got to high school the following year, I was lucky because my sports coordinator was actually a legend of Wellington women's rugby, a woman named Marama Tauroa. And she put a notice in the school notices saying that she wanted to start a girls' team. And I was the only one that turned up, which at that time, a pretty scrawny little white girl, she was kind of like, this is, not what I was envisioning. But I said, give me a week. And I think I managed to recruit 10 people to come join. So she then matched my effort, and we coordinated with our neighbouring high school, who we were usually rivals with, but we put a team in together. So Newlands, they gave us most of our forward pack, and Onslow was most of our backline, and we played together. Oh, and one girl, Tasia, would come from Tawa, and we'd play all together. And then Marzi also pulled me into her club space. So when I was 13, I started playing women's club rugby, because at that time there was no rules against it, and it was tiny little thing out there, run as fast as you can. Lucky for me, that was pretty quick back then. But yeah, it was a whole amazing world. I actually made both the Wellington secondary school rep team when I was 13, after having played 8 games of rugby in my life. And then I made the Wellington women's sevens team at age 13 as well. Once burnt off Wharapama when I was 13 years old. So that's my claim to fame. So played secondary schools all through high school, played also for the Johnsonville women's team. That was my first club. We had to leave them because they were pretty dinosaur sexist back there. Ended up at Wainuiomata, which is where I played most of my club rugby after that. Made it back into the Wellington women's sevens team in like 2012, which was around when Go for Gold had happened. So sevens reignited for women, and that's when I came back into it. So I played 2012 season, and then the 2014 is when I made the Wellington Pride, so the Wellington, the 15-a-side team. Played for them for a number of years, but in 2017 is when I went over and played in England. They just started this new domestic competition, so I thought, in order to get the most out of my rugby, I'm going to go and try myself internationally. Went and played 2 years over in England for Richmond, and then came back to New Zealand. My last season for Wellington Pride in 2021, I believe. So I unfortunately finished up just before Soper kicked off. I think if we're talking planning and communication, had I known that that was on the horizon, I probably would have stuck around for an extra year to try and get a cap for the Hurricanes Paua. But as it was, I'd hung up my boots. So by that stage, it was going into coaching instead. So I have a world rugby coach, that you've got to coach the coaches. I have one of those qualifications, and I spent a couple of years coaching my local club, so Wainuiomata Women's there as well. So yeah, that's all the best.
Awesome. I always feel like when I'm talking to you, I'm like, I feel like I know my level of rugby ignorance knows no bounds, and I always have such respect and admiration for your just expertise in rugby generally. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I have so many questions, and also just like an observation straight out the gate that it is an entirely different thing to have an existing infrastructure and just choose to slot in with the existing infrastructure. Like, oh, of course, all the kids my age are part of the under sevens or whatever. And so I'm going to go and do the tryouts and be part of the under sevens gold team or whatever it is. It's an entirely different thing to do that than it is for someone to go, hey, do we want to have a girls team? And you know what? I'm going to show up, be the only one who shows up for the girls team. And then I'm going to show up for the girls team, and there's no other girls. And I'm going to put in the effort to go and find enough other girls to play this game. Like, just what a difference it is. And I think, was it Dan Carter? We were just on a call recently with Dan Carter. He was talking about his dream of becoming an All Black and how he was like mapped out all the steps. And I think it was you made that comment to me, didn't you? That like, what a luxury that is to be able to map out all the steps, right?
Yeah. I often describe it at times to people. It's like if you've ever seen the, Harry Potter movies with like the shifting staircases. I think that's what it can feel like if you're a woman or girl in sport. We've had a lot of stop-starts and a lot of changes. And, that whole hunger for the history, I think, is attached to that, because I'm often told that things are the way that they are right now, and that's all. But I'm always interested in, okay, but how did we get here? What is like the whakapapa of these ideas that we are operating with, but also knowing that the history of women's sport is in protest. Like, nobody ever gave women permission to play. They just actually gave it to themselves. And so understanding that means that that early stop starts will be invisible. But okay, the first recorded, and I'm always at pains to say recorded because it's only what was written down, the first recorded instance of women, girls playing rugby in New Zealand was in 1888, and that was here in my hometown of Wellington, and it was a match played between the Wellington High School girls and the Hallelujah Lasses, who are a Salvation Army team, and they had a big debate about modifying some of the moves, the rules, to remove elements of roughness, because there's all kinds of concerns, temperamental and physical, of what it would do to girls if we were allowed to play. But there's so many interesting things that come out of that. There was then a tour that was organised in 1891, the first time women were paid to play in New Zealand, 1891. And that was Nita Webb, who organised a tournament, a touring team, because at that time there was a bit of a kind of vaudeville act with, women doing traditionally men things. So I'm not going to say it was like not at all against our expense, but these women did come together and train. They then didn't get the opportunity to play, though, because her husband got convicted of fraud, and so it all fell over before they got to go on the tour. But they did come together. And the fascinating thing about that, when you talk about the whakapapa of ideas, is you read the things that Nita Webb wrote to the paper, who were outraged about women playing at that time. You read her rebuttal to those detractors, and there are echoes in the same conversations we're having to have now. And so you're like...
what kind of things did she say?
Well, she says, do we really believe that women are so physically unable to be able to handle themselves in these spaces? Are we really saying that women can only occupy certain predetermined roles? All of these, roadblocks that get put in front of that also that there isn't interest, because that is also a myth. That 1888 game, people paid 5 shillings each to come and watch that. And if you do the inflation, that's a lot of money to watch some schoolgirls play. So, challenging that notion of othering and that not for, and particularly when you think about a sport like rugby and how, and if I'm going back to the colonial project of it all, how important it was actually in terms of formative New Zealand, of instilling our cultural identity, particularly around men in this country. How since the beginning then we've had challenges to women occupying that space, because it starts to unpack all of that.
So 1880s, 1890s, not only women playing, but women getting paid to play, touring. Mm-hmm. You talked about stop-starts. What is it that has been the stopping? Obviously it hasn't just been yay, now we're starting to see that women can do this and can get paid and people will turn up or whatever. What's been the pushback?
Yeah, so that group in the 1890s, when I'm saying she was writing those rebuttals, a lot of that was, how dare these women, basically. It was that this is a men's game for men, so how dare they, and that this is so dangerous and impractical and disrespectful of everybody to have women playing that, right? So that was definitely a very strong attitude that continued into the 1920s, when there was another team organised here in Wellington who were trying to do the same thing. There was a lot written about those women at the time. And, one of the opinion pieces of the day was saying, well, if women start to play this men's game, then the men who play it must be a bunch of sissies. That was the attack on myself. You can't do my thing, because what does that say about me if you can do my thing? And so there's a lot, again, when I'm talking about the history of women's sports and the protests of it all, there's a real alignment. These ebbs and flows are in relation to the waves of feminism. So, what was also happening in New Zealand in the 1890s? Well, it was sovereignty, that we were getting the suffrage, in terms of getting women the right to vote. In the 1920s, what's happening for women? We're having that entry into the workforce because of the world wars and that changing role that women were playing. And actually through the, next period, the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, that's actually how a lot of women played their rugby, was as fundraisers for the war effort, that they would have these exhibition matches and that they were allowed to play under these terms. The roadblock came in when these women wanted to turn those one-off matches into tournaments, because then it challenged the idea that this was a men's space. And so again, if you look at that position of where women have existed in sports, there's a lot of pushback on that role that we are and aren't allowed to play.
There's a lot for us to get into here. And I think you know me well enough that you won't take this question to mean in any way, any kind of implication that I am anti-women's sport. Okay, so let me get all my caveating out of the way right up front, right?
Yeah.
Here's my caveating. I am pro women's sport. I am pro paid professional women's sport. I am pro women touring. I am pro the Women's Rugby World Cup. I am delighted that we are now calling it the Men's Rugby World Cup and not just the Rugby World Cup and the Women's Rugby World Cup. I, believe anyone should be able to play the sport that they want. Like I'm all of these things. I am super pro.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I'm curious about right now is, this thing about like, well, if women can play this, that means men are sissies, which to me speaks to an idea that my strength or fragility is dependent on its exclusivity. I'm asking you this as someone who I think has thought about this a fair bit. One of the things that I am also like acutely attuned to is I believe that we are in a sort of a crisis of masculinity, in that men have all sorts of messages of like, oh, you can't be toxically masculine, but you also have to be strong, but you can't be strong in that way, but you need to be strong in this way, but you're think you're a provider, but women can make all the money, but you're supposed to be this, but you're not supposed to be that. There's a piece there that I'm observing of like, men die earlier, suffer from depression more prone to suicide, like so many challenges here. And so my curiosity there is, what is your view today of the women's game as relates to role for men? It feels, as I'm saying, it feels like maybe a shitty question. If it feels like a shitty question to you, I invite you to tell me that. I'm just curious about, like, I'm just curious about this because I am a super feminist, and my feminism is so rooted in a need and a desire to also uplift men. And so I'm just curious about your thoughts on that. That's not really a very clear question, but
Yeah. No, I have some.
Great. Excellent. I figured you might.
I think there's a really interesting thing. I've been talking about this with a couple of people, just friends of mine, observational stuff around masculinity, and how it's actually also I tie these kind of things together in my head, rightly or wrongly, but how if we're thinking about, like, again, white culture, right? We think about whiteness often is defined by what it isn't rather than what it is. And that I think that can be where white people struggle sometimes, as we kind of go, I don't know what I am really, because I can see other people have things and they have these notes and these beats that they play, but because my identity is so just it's set by default, it's kind of nothing, it's just assumed in these spaces. So I say all of that because I think masculinity is similar. I think that it's been really become to be defined by what it isn't rather than what it is. And so a lot of it is about making sure you're never mistaken for being feminine, that all of it is, we can't be that. So you've got to be overcorrecting almost. And so then it gets lost. And so I think my message to men in terms of within rugby is, I feel for me within women's rugby, and I truly believe this, and I've had all types of very heated discussions with folks about this, but I truly believe that women's sports are actually made safer by the inclusion of trans women in our sports, because I think they force a conversation about inclusivity, about fairness, about privilege. They force these things to the fore so that we actually have to examine what they really are. So it makes, by extension of that, it makes me safer in the sport because we're having these conversations.
Where do you think that conversation should be had?
Yeah, so I think in terms of for like men in this, I'm like, in the same way,
we're going to all the trickiest places right now.
Yeah, why not? They should be welcoming women in too, because actually I think in the same way, more women's participation within rugby actually makes rugby safer for everyone. And I think so many of the roadblocks that rugby is running into right now, in terms of its connection to the younger generation, a lot of that is to do with it kind of playing the notes of your grandfathers and it needing to modernize itself. In terms of understanding what connects with younger fans, in terms of understanding that there are a larger group of young men right now who see a lot of what rugby has traditionally been and are actually really turned off by that, but that there is an opportunity for a new way of doing things, and we are seeing that modelled within the women's game. That it doesn't.
What does that look like? What is that new way of doing things look like?
I think that it doesn't have to be as adverse, like, there doesn't have to be as winner and loser. And I know that that sounds crazy because we're talking about a sport here, but there's a couple of things attached to that. The first thing is I read an interesting piece of research earlier this year that was specifically actually looking at netball fans in this country. But what they found was that netball fans basically want everyone within that space to be treated in a way that upholds their mana. So that, okay, if there's a drama with the coach, and we've seen that playing out in New Zealand netball this year, that it's okay to challenge performance and things like that, but we want to do that in a way that's actually upholding that person's mana. That it's not necessarily that they're wrong, but that the timing is wrong, that the structures are wrong, that the situation is wrong, so that we're holding on to that mana of that person in that moment. And I say that because I also think that there's a marketing issue attached to this as well, which is if you look at the kind of two lines of sports marketing, there is an idea of you either leading personality first or team first. Now, the All Blacks and, being our biggest brand have gone team first really hard for a long time now. But team first can only really be selling when you win. And if you lose, it's not as good of a story to sell to people. But if you go personality first,
what does that mean, personality first?
That's connecting more. We've done a big thing for quite a while now around it's all about the jersey. Mm-hmm. I don't care about the jersey. I want to know about the heart beating underneath it.
So it's like Alona Mayer getting
personalities.
U.S. rugby star. I always clarify because there are people listening who maybe haven't heard of the people I'm talking about, right? So Alona Mayer, who's this U.S. rugby star who has millions of followers on social media, and U.S. rugby does okay. They're not, the Black Ferns. They're not like a terrible team, but she's got all these followers because of that personality first. Is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely, and that we had a version of this in the 90s, and that version was Jonah Lomu. And at that time, when the men's game was professionalizing, they didn't need a champion team, they needed a champion. And it was Jonah Lomu that got people into it.
Would it be fair to say that these two options, team first or personality first, it's not about one being better or righter, more right than the other. It's about that they each kind of have their moment. Like I think about, for example, in the U.S., the Savannah Bananas. I don't know if you've come across the Savannah Bananas, this ridiculous baseball team that does all these performances and dances and whatever. They're very personality first, and they do hugely well. But the lesson that I take from them is not that all teams should be like the Savannah Bananas. It's that the Savannah Bananas have strategically positioned themselves personality first, and the All Blacks have for some time strategically positioned themselves team first, and are, each of those will have its moments where that strategic choice comes up against its own limitations. And maybe we're seeing some of that with the All Blacks. Is that fair to say?
Yep, absolutely. And I think that this is also to do with relevance, right? And so when I'm talking about like that generational shift, we've gone from a position where if I was a child now, I told you the beginning of my story was I grew up in the 90s, so rugby was everywhere and it was unavoidable and it was the sport, right? It was infused everything. I don't know if that would be my story if I was a kid born in 2025. I think there might be a story actually now that actually the Black Ferns get to be shown to me, but there could also be the Kiwi Ferns, there could also be the Tauihi Basketball League, there can also be netball. There's just so many options now. And that's fantastic, but it does mean that you have to work a little bit harder in terms of cutting through and getting those, connection. And I just think the gateway for every new fan is personality first. Like you're going to like someone and then you'll like the team. And we saw that with even in New Zealand with the Black Ferns during our World Cup. It was Ruby Tui that made people excited about the Black Ferns.
Yeah. And so if I circle back, I just want to make sure I'm closing the loop on this question. So the question was, what is it that makes the sport, and particularly the women's sport, different to the men's in the way that you were describing, where the men's is like, this is your grandfather's game, and the women are like, this is what the future of the game might look like. And what I'm hearing you say is it's that distinction between team first and personality first. And so is your position that actually for today's youth, personality first is where we're at?
I think so.
Or where it's at?
And also just the idea too of like, we don't know enough about our grandmothers to be able to market them.
Yes.
We can't talk about the legacy stuff because also New Zealand rugby was a bit naughty in parts of our legacy. So you can't necessarily use that as our marketing point. So actually that women's rugby is always looking to the future and the All Blacks right now is always looking to the past. It's like, you probably need to look at balancing, both of them do, I wish we would do more to spotlight actually our incredible whakapapa. You know, you hear the stat all the time about the All Blacks being the most winningest team of all time. Get out of here. That was the Black Ferns, like, for so long. They went unbeaten at the World Cup for like 4 World Cups. And we're talking every match, like pool play. For goodness sake, you know, there's no team that's ever won as much as they have. But we don't know about it.
Yeah.
Because we
we
only
need that
talk about the
correct the
future and
internet.
the now. Yeah.
That correct the internet campaign. So here's a question though: if personality first is more appealing to today's audiences or today's young people, and you've just given me 2 examples of personality first. We've talked about 3 actually just now. We talked about Jonah Lamu, Alona Mayer, Ruby Tui. Those people are those people. Like, what do you do if you don't have a Jonah Lamu or an Alona? I don't think USA Rugby planned for Alona. She just,
absolutely didn't.
came out of, right. Like how do you invite that or cultivate that when it's so dependent on having someone who captures people's imaginations in that way, which is something that, almost by definition is really hard to plan.
I just think that we expand whose stories we're telling, because also we've just talked there about 3 players, but I know I've pitched this in the past, and so I'm continuing to trademark this, as I would love to do a series that you effectively call Game Day, where you look at the same match from 6 different perspectives, but that's all the people who are getting ready for Game Day. That's Game Day as a captain, that's Game Day as a fan, that's Game Day as a groundskeeper, that's Game Day as the person working at the tuck shop. The idea that actually this is a whole story, I just think we're so narrow right now, and so there's so few ways to make your way in, and like particularly when it comes to the community sport of it all, telling the story of all of us. Come on now.
Can I say I love that idea? And so anyone listening who is involved with whoever receives these kinds of pitches, you heard it here first. Alice Soper's trademarked it, so definitely hit her up to make this series. But what it calls to mind for me is a couple of things. One is I just saw on, it must have been LinkedIn because I'm on LinkedIn all the time, but a little clip of this guy, a player who was kind of being heckled for something. I don't know what happened, but they were walking onto the field or off of the field in the tunnel, and he jumped over the railing to help a groundsman with a cart that he was pushing, the groundsman was struggling with or something. And he was like, he's just another member of the team. He just has a different role. And it's something that, the Crusaders, I think, are exceptional at, where they're really mindful of, like, actually the players just happen to have a certain role in the team, which is the entire organization, which includes the marketing folks and the partnership folks and the groundskeepers and who's doing the ticket sales and who's doing the logistics and all the catering and all that kind of stuff. And this idea that, like, none of it could happen without the entire team, including the fans, because if the fans didn't show up, none of those folks would have jobs. So, I love the premise.
Yeah, there's a beautiful story I know that the Samoan men's team will tell you about. There was a tour they did in New Zealand, like on a bus in the early 90s, but they talk about specifically that in Samoan culture, that the idea of the crowd, that they are part of the team, that you can't have team without crowd, because then what is it? And I think that's a part that's also been kind of missed when we've been professionalizing. And that's also got to do with like how revenue streams come in now. Everything is optimized for viewership, so for the screen. It's awesome watching rugby on TV. I told you that's how I did it. It's not necessarily awesome to go to rugby because it's all optimized for the broadcast, because the broadcast is the revenue, and attached to that is the sponsorship too, and all of those pieces.
So what's ironic about that for me is that when the in-person experience is optimized, it makes a better broadcast experience. 100%. And I had a conversation, I'm not going to name who because I don't know if I have his authorization to talk about him publicly. I had a conversation with the chief marketing officer for a sporting organization in the US that includes like NBA teams and NHL teams. And he was talking to me about how his number one job for basketball, his number one job is to fill the arena, because he's like, it's so boring to watch on TV if it's not a sold out crowd. And so he will happily like give away tickets or deep discount tickets or whatever, do whatever promotion he needs to do to make sure the arena is full. so that the broadcast experience is going to be so much more compelling to watch. And there's a story that I heard from you, but I would like you to tell it because I don't remember it well. And I know you'll tell it so much better than I am. Tell me what the Tokomanawa Queens have done to create a personality-led experience versus a team-led experience.
Yeah, and so this has been really interesting to watch over, this is a new league, the Tauihi Basketball League. They're one of the most interesting leagues to watch right now, just in general, because they're innovating every year. There's been something that has shifted each year. So they're really having to have that agility and that test and response constantly. But what the Queens have done is really make sure that that home game is a full experience. And so that started in the first couple of years with they got world famous in New Zealand, but also the rest of the country, King Kapisi on the mic. So, like, again, if you're a person of a certain generation, you definitely know who King Kapisi is. But even if you're not, you're going to find out. But he also really leading the crowd in overcoming the permission issue. I think that our crowds in New Zealand need permission to make noise. We're very polite people. We're not sure when's the right thing to do things. So he early on trained the crowd call and response. He'll say, and he'll get you to do it 100 times, before tip off or in the first quarter. He'll say, Tokomanawa Queens, and then we say, that's my team. So that any point then throughout, we know what the call is. First game I ever went to, they had a line when we came in of dancers who are, all high energy. You're walking through their hype tunnel, and then someone's giving you a T-shirt. It's not necessarily like the flashiest piece of merch ever, but you immediately have something that you can put on that makes you part of their team. Mm-hmm. You then have a mascot. And again, leaning into the difference that they have, they've always made their mascot Queen T, who is a drag queen, who will activate the crowd, who will dance, who will have a whole part of it as well. Looking at all of these pieces to put it together, giveaways constantly. All of the sponsors have given something that will be thrown into the crowd, whether that's a basketball or whatever else. You don't leave the match without that. I have, and I'm wondering if I've got it on my desk. I usually have it around here. Yes, here we go. Trading cards. I'm still waiting for that in other sports. We've been so slow. But they, here we go, got a couple of different examples. But, one season they had them wearing their own outfits and stylized in that way. And then we can get it together, we can get them signed after the game. Or in the other one, they had a more of a action shot. And again, we can get them signed along the way, some key stats there. But I'm immediately like, I've got these still, right?
Yeah. Do they don't have a frame thingy that you can tuck them into to show that you have them all?
Put that onto Rachel Taulele. For that. But she
Rachel Taulele is a goddess. I am sorry. She is just, if you're listening, you don't know who Rachel Taulele is, look her up and follow her on LinkedIn. She is just a superwoman. She's amazing.
And so she's one of the co-owners. And so that whole experience, she's also there. You see her every time at a home match. And so she's making sure to do that manaakitanga, making sure everyone in that space is looked after so that you're actually seen and valued and feel like it actually matters that you're there.
Can we just talk about this a little more? Because there's so many things in there that I want to highlight and things I've noticed elsewhere as well. It's one of the things that happens whenever I go to the States. Well, not whenever. Often when I go to the States, I go to NBA games. And it's one of the things I notice in NBA games, and again, this speaks to what this guy was telling me about the in-person experience, that there is not a second of downtime. That if they take literally a 2-minute timeout on the court, they've got the sizzling seniors, grooving grannies or whatever coming out and doing a little dance or whatever. Like, they're so well set up for it. And it's so clear that the entire approach is about what is your experience going to be? And it's not, I feel like it's simplistic to say it's an entertainment product versus a sports product, but it is really, it's more about, it's an experience versus a game. And the thought has been put into every level and every moment of that experience. And it creates such a difference. And the thing I love about the Tokomanawa Queens and this story is, like, there's so many things I love about it, but one of the things I'm always doing in these kinds of moments is going, what's the dynamic that's getting activated here? And there's a few things. You talked about overcoming that permission impulse or permission barrier. I forget the words used. But that thing of going, actually, I want to be part of the group. I want to be part of the chant, but I need to learn it so I don't feel like an idiot when the chant happens. And so having someone there, like, number one, as soon as I walk in, I feel welcome and belonged because I've got this t-shirt. So I know I'm meant to be part of this group. And then having someone there who is comfortable and confident to train me in it so that I can feel like this is my thing that I'm supposed to do, and not like, oh, it's your thing and I'm sort of awkwardly, trying to nudge my way in. There's so much about the interpersonal, like, psychological dynamics there that I think are so fascinating that we can learn from, not just in other sporting contexts, but in so many other, like, this is a thing when I'm facilitating, right? One of the things that I always do, I never just ask a question straight up to the room, because exactly what you're talking about, people need a chance to test out what they're going to say before they say it in public. So I go, okay, turn to the person next to you or discuss it at your table and then come back and we're going to talk about it. So much in terms of those dynamics about how do we let people feel a sense of belonging so that they can participate the way they want to participate. People are desperate to belong and to participate, so that we create that pathway for them to participate joyfully.
Yeah. And that it feels like it matters that you're there.
Yes.
I just think that that's such a big part of it. Like, that there is so many things where it's like just switching that whole gratitude equation.
Yes.
Rather than, you have to be like, thank you, thank you, thank you. You can say you're welcome that we turned up. And that who's thanking who is flipped around. I kind of just feel like when we've got stuck in how it's been, and when we haven't had to fight for the eyeballs, and when we've had the, audience presented to us just by nations, identity.
Yes.
We can sometimes act like you're welcome that we brought the All Blacks to your town, instead of thank you for turning up. And it's been interesting to see, obviously you've seen this with the men's team, and full credit to them, that they are now doing more service in community to make sure that, they've gone and painted a fence so that you actually have a connection back. And you have to do that intentionally now, because these boys are pulled out of pipeline at age 16. So you don't have the connection you once did just by nature of that's from my club. So you have to actually build that connection back into your community, because otherwise, who are these guys?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And I think there's a thing in there, though, about what does it mean to have gratitude and to say thank you. And the thing that sprang to mind for me is, back to just the very beginning of this conversation, where what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman, right? There is a risk there that the women are like, oh, we're just so grateful that you'd even come to our game. And the men are like, well, of course, you should be grateful that we graced you with our presence. And I don't think that's what we're saying at all here, that actually there's a premise there of any player can feel gratitude for the ability, and I see this in the men all the time, right? Feel gratitude for the ability to play this game that they love and that they feel confident and powerful at, men and women. And we all know that we can't do what we do without fans. And so we feel this huge gratitude for the fans, because it's not like, oh, thank you for gracing us with your presence. It's more just like, we recognize that we, Ubuntu, right? We are because you are. We are able to do this because we do this together. You're able to be a fan because we play, and we're able to play because you're a fan.
Yeah. Yeah. And so putting all of that back together, I just feel, we need to make room and understand that, like, always making room for other people, it's only going to make you stronger. And so that kind of ties it back together for all of it for me. And so when I'm going back to, for me, the way to fairness, the way to championships, the way to everything that you want in terms of that sporting experience has to be through inclusion, that you create the spaces of inclusion, that can then draw more diversity, and that can then relate to fairness. You cannot put those two things at odds with each other, that fairness and inclusion are competing. That's a nonsense. You can never be fair if you're not inclusive first.
So I accept that totally. Let's bring fairness, inclusion together. We'll put them together here in this one togetherness piece. How does that fit in with, I want to win the World Cup? Mm-hmm. Which is not winning the World Cup, which is, well, maybe something I need to examine here. Is winning the World Cup about fairness? Does that go hand in hand? Yeah, I'm just, I don't know.
For me it does. For me it does, because if I'm thinking about the main reason I do all of the mahi I do, particularly in terms of advocating for women in sport, is my biggest frustration is when talent isn't given access to opportunities. And so that's an inclusion issue. So we have to sort that first in order for us to have the best crop of talent, to then compete, to then assemble, to then go and win championships. If we are not making sure that step one is inclusive and that we're getting as many people in there as possible to be able to have a shot, then they can't reveal themselves for anything else. Yeah, sure, once we get to a limited number, because we've got to pick a team to then go through, the fairness question then is, was there, we said, for Dan Carter at 16, being able to make a plan, was there the opportunity for all of those young girls at 16 to be able to look and see where is my pathway to the top? Because if there isn't, that's an inclusion issue. That's then is stumbling over fairness, is then over, achievement. We have to get that first step right. And that has to be inclusion.
Awesome. Tell me about, we have maybe 10 minutes left. Tell me about your experience with the Women's World Cup just passed.
Well, we also have to say thank you to Kyla, of course, while we're on this call. No,
I swear I was not fishing. I swear I was not fishing.
But I'm going to give it to you anyway. No, yeah. So look, talking about inclusion and fairness. I knew, because I've been watching this game and following it and writing about it and living it for so many years, we knew, we could see the writing on the wall that this thing was going to be the biggest ever. When the pre-sale for tickets is outselling what was our record-breaking, event here in New Zealand, you just knew something was going to be massive. And so that event, an opening weekend outsold, the opening match of this World Cup was bigger than the final that we had at the last one, which was the biggest ever audience for women's rugby. That we fast forward to the final game itself, and that the third and fourth playoff that Ruahei de Mont spoke about, because I asked her the question afterwards, saying that they didn't actually expect the crowd to be full. It was a sellout at Twickenham that day, but because they were effectively the warm-up act, they didn't expect people to arrive. Their bus was delayed because there was too many people. 55,000 turning up for theirs, which means it was again bigger than the final that was played in 2022, and then 82,000 at that women's final. So you knew it was going to be this big. We know that we're at a really interesting moment in the sport in terms of the gentrification of it. Everything changes after now. All the beautiful access and the sisterhood and stuff, it changes because there's now a larger commercial element, and that's fantastic. But it's a moment, in time that I knew was like the last, the end of the beginning. So I had to be there. And then for me personally, because I had played in England, I played in the beginning of the PWR, the first 2 seasons. It was a coming home as well in terms of catching up with a lot of folks. So the PWR is the best domestic women's rugby competition in the world. It's so good it got both England and Canada to the final, because most of the Canadian women's team plays in the PWR. We've now, since the World Cup, there are 8 Black Ferns that are playing in the PWR. So it's a domestic competition that runs from October through April-ish, and 10 teams around England play each other, 2 rounds and then finals. That must be nice. Anyway, so I played in the precursor to that. It got rebranded as PWR a couple of years ago, but I played in the Tyrrell's 15s, which is what it was called before then. Anyway, chance to go home and reconnect with a bunch of folks. So I wanted to go, but I also knew that we kind of had a downturn in terms of the media landscape here in Aotearoa. Unfortunately, women's sports coverage is still a smaller percentage of the overall. I think last stats was about 28% of news coverage in New Zealand goes to women's sports. If you look at that specifically within rugby, it's the smallest percentage again. We need to tell stories in order to make people excited. There's a whole food chain thing there. But anyway, I wanted to make sure that I went. So I had pitched myself around here the other because I'm a freelancer. It wasn't coming, but I knew that this game-changing event was, so I just booked my ticket anyway, because I needed to be there to tell stories, and the stories I like to tell are the heart ones. And that I was like, I'm in a unique position, having played with a number of these women who are still out there on the field, being played with a number of women who are in emerging teams that people maybe don't know enough about. I'm talking about Manusina Samoa in that regard. But also I know people's mums. And I know some of the old girls who like formed the game in the 90s, so can be a bit of a bridge between those stories as well. So I wanted to tell all those stories and be there to capture that good stuff. Bought my tickets. What am I going to do? Who knows? We'll figure it out. And then I got a lovely message from Kyla and from Sasha Coburn as well to say, we love what you're doing. We want to back you because you want to live your values just like you are, and help sponsor me for that trip. So I think that there's so many things amongst all of that of you actually can just make things happen sometimes. I think if we wait too long to want things to change, it already has.
So I love your coverage, freelance coverage. Where do people follow you at?
So Alice Soapbox on all of the things. I'm consistent. So that's Instagram, TikTok. I also have a Substack at the same thing where I write about all types of different things, to be honest. But mainly women's rugby all the time because I'm obsessed with it. And
so
our podcast.
Two things.
Les and me have a podcast, Full Credit, and we did just win bronze at the podcast awards. So I should also give that a plug.
Congratulations. What's the name of the podcast?
Full Credit, because we want to give women in the game full credit. So that's what we do every week during the season.
Amazing. Okay, so on your various social medias, I mean, the way that I first came across you is through my dear colleague, Hannah Hudson, who found a clip of you talking about the difference between a short arm penalty and a long arm penalty. And to this day, we still quote it because you were so adorable, where you're like, a short arm penalty is a whoopsie and a long arm penalty is you made a very naughty choice. And so we're always saying to each other, you made a very naughty choice. But then I also saw, I've watched a whole bunch of your stuff, but one of the things that I remember so vividly from this most recent Women's Rugby World Cup, and I say Women's Rugby World Cup because thank goodness now they call it the Men's Rugby World Cup, so we're clear what we're talking about. So the Women's Rugby World Cup, a clip that you shared of you were watching an American woman watching rugby. It was an American woman had posted a clip on TV where she was watching the USA Eagles play a play that they were doing, and she was so excited about it, and she was like narrating what she was seeing, but she had no clue what she was looking at. She's like, I don't understand what's happening, but they're obviously so excited, and now I'm so excited. And you, bless you, made this clip where you're watching her and then you're like, well, let me explain it to you. And you explained in just the most inviting, gorgeous way, talk about inclusion, talk about welcoming, talk about not making someone feel silly for not knowing something that they don't yet know. And so this embodying that you have of how do you tell these heart-centered stories in a way that is just so open and warm. And my question for you is, can you give me like a story or two that came out of this most recent World Cup that really touched your heart?
I drove from York to Manchester to watch Samoa and Australia play. I wanted to be there because while Samoa and the Wallaroos, not necessarily earmarked to win, two of my favorite stories in terms of me being on the spot came out of that day, because on the Manusina side, I had a message from this woman named Petra, who is the mum of Fa'asua Makesi, who is a woman I played with a number of years. Like, we played Wellington provincial rugby together first, maybe 2015. Great back, like love. I think she was very unlucky actually to never be looked at for higher honours, but fantastic centre. Gosh, you'd break your nose how many times just putting yourself in the middle of everything. Anyway, Petra had messaged me and said, I'm actually coming and surprising Soa. She doesn't know. And I said, cool, I'm going to follow you with a camera. And she was like, no, I hate it. I don't want it. And I was like, you don't hate me though. You can handle it. So I sat on her shoulder and had my phone and capturing that moment of Soa being surprised by her mum in the crowd. And look, Samoa had got pumped that day, but who cares? Her girl just got to play out a World Cup. This is the first time that Samoa has been back at a World Cup for a number of years. So a really special moment for those two to be together. That, clip that I get there then ends up on the BBC because, again, doesn't matter how flash your camera is. If you've got the connection, you've got the story, that's what they want. That was one moment. But for me personally, the one afterwards was in the press conference where, again, there's not enough people there for the Wallaroos for Australia. The room had more or less emptied out. There was me and a couple of other people, my friend James, who was there specifically to cover Pacific women that were playing in the tournament. So anyway, I'm talking to my friend Emily Chancellor. Moleka was with her. And they had come through and we were doing the normal, Q&A stuff. But I had given the Wallaroos a bit of stick on my Instagram the week before because I said, look, we got 4 teams from Oceania Rugby at this tournament. There's obviously New Zealand, there's Samoa, Fiji, and Australia. I had seen 3 teams sing beautifully. Australia hadn't heard your voices yet. And so I'd given them a call out on socials. And so in the post-match, in the stand-up, where we're in a room and it's a scrum and everybody's there trying to get their best clip, I asked Emily and I said, hey, I haven't heard you lot sing. Are Aussie going to get their act together? And I said, yeah, you ready right now? And then they sang a song. And not only did they sing a song, they sang an Indigenous Australian song. And that was so special. And the whole room, all the other interviews and everything went quiet because that was magic that was happening just there. Not just like the Wallaroos getting to show who they are in terms of the beautiful thing that they can represent to Australia, like not just Australian rugby, but to Australia in terms of embracing their Indigenous cultures, but also like showing who they are, that they're going to play a little bit and they're ready to meet that challenge. And yeah, look, they might go to quarterfinals or whatever else, but they're here and they're backing themselves. That was beautiful. And to trust me with that, because we have known each other and because I do turn up to the press conferences when not enough people are there for them, that they gave me the gift of that moment because they're like, we see you also, that you have been here for 3 years at least asking us questions, so we're going to give you this clip. That was, hugely validating.
It's such a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing it. And it really just highlights that it's not about the medal or the cup. It's about the people and our sense of connection and belonging. Alice, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me. It's been an absolute delight.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Always any chance to talk, sports and life and the beautiful amalgam of the two of them.
Thank you so much for listening. I am such a huge fan of Alice's. She is so warm and inviting and inclusive. She is just a terrific ambassador for the sport of rugby. And in my view, we are so lucky to have her out there doing her thing. This is our final episode for the year. Our team is going to take a well-earned break, and we will be back in your ear holes in February 2026. Thank you so much for listening to this inaugural year of the podcast. It's been so much fun to make, and I feel just incredibly privileged to talk to these extraordinary humans and share their stories with you. Have a fantastic Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Festivus, whatever you celebrate. Have a terrific break and see you next year. Hunger and Heart is brought to you by the Crusaders Leadership Programme. Whether you're coaching under fives or a professional team, we all want the same thing: to build a culture of trust, to get the best out of your people, and to grow players into leaders. The Crusaders Leadership Program lets you get up close and personal with some of the greatest rugby legends of all time. People like Sir Wayne Smith, Sam Whitelock, Kieran Read. You'll connect with a global group of ambitious, caring coaches from a range of codes and backgrounds. And most importantly, you'll gain skills and techniques to drive impact and outcomes for your team. The Crusaders Leadership Program is a 2-week, high-intensity virtual experience. It is delivered exclusively online, accessible from anywhere. Hunger and Heart listeners get 10% off the full price of the program. Use the code HUNGER at checkout. You can find out more about the Crusaders Leadership Program at crusadersleadership.com. That's crusadersleadership.com. Hunger and Heart is created by BOMA and the entire BOMA team.
including Tito Bernal, Ray Jangle, Hannah Hudson, Johanna Coxon, Sunil Unka, and me, Kyla Colvin. Thanks for listening.